The courtroom was a cathedral of polished marble built to uphold honor, but if you looked closely at the family in the front row, you wouldn't see dignity. You would see greed hiding behind a well-tailored suit. I'm Natalia Benson. As my mother twisted her rosary praying for a massive insurance payout, I wasn't looking at the money. I was remembering the cold draft of the police station 13 years ago, the night they sacrificed me to save my brother. They think I am just a stranger here to verify a signature. They have no idea I hold the pen that will seal their fate. Listen closely. Can you hear that scritch? Scratch. Pause. That is the sound of a fountain pen moving across heavy cotton fiber paper. To most people, it is just a sound. To me, it is a heartbeat. It tells me everything I need to know about a person. My name is Natalia Benson. I don't read palms and I don't read tea leaves. I read ink. I am a forensic document examiner. In the eyes of the court, I am a weapon of truth. I look at a signature and I see the tremor of a hand that is lying. I see the heavy pressure of a man who is angry. I see the light floating stroke of a woman who is afraid. People think they can hide their secrets in the curves of their letters. They think a forgery is just about copying a shape. They are wrong. You cannot fake the rhythm of your own soul. A lie always weighs more than the truth. It drags the pen down. It leaves a mark. I know this because I have spent 13 years studying the weight of lies. The air conditioner in my hotel room is loud. It covers the silence of the city outside. I stand in front of the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me is sharp. Severe even. I am wearing a navy blue suit tailored to the millimeter. My hair is pulled back in a tight bun. Not a single strand is out of place. I pick up the iron and press it against the collar of my white blouse. Hiss. The steam rises. The crease is perfect. Everything about me today is perfect. It has to be. Order is my armor. Precision is my shield. I am not the girl I used to be. I am not the messy crying teenager who begged for mercy. I am successful. I am respected. I charge $400 an hour to tell judges what is real and what is fake. But as I stare at my reflection, the steam from the iron fades, and for a second I don't see the hotel room. I don't see the expensive furniture or the view of the courthouse across the street. I hear a sound from the past, a sound that still wakes me up at 3 a.m. Slam. The sound of a heavy front door closing, then the silence. It was 13 years ago, a Tuesday in November. I was 16 years old. I remember the cold. Our house was always warm, but that night the front door had been left open. The winter wind was cutting through the hallway, curling around my ankles. Outside the window, there were no sirens, just the lights. Blue, red, blue, red. They washed over the living room walls, turning the family portraits into grotesque shifting shadows. My brother Caleb was sitting on the beige sofa. He was 19. He was the golden boy, the heir, the one who was going to take over the business. But that night he looked small. He was weeping, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He had stolen checks from my father's company, not one or two, dozens. He had gambled it all away online. It was a felony. The police were outside talking to the neighbors. They were coming in 5 minutes to make an arrest. My father stood in front of me. I can still smell him. Old coffee and panic. He gripped my shoulders. His fingers dug into my skin so hard I thought they would leave bruises. "Natalia, listen to me," he whispered. His voice was shaking, but it was hard. "Caleb has the scholarship. He has the internship at the bank. If he gets a record, his life is over. The business is over." I looked at him confused. "Daddy, what are you saying?" "You're 16, he said. The words came out fast, like he wanted to get rid of them. "You're a minor. The courts go easy on minors. They seal the records when you turn 18. It disappears." like it never happened. I tried to pull away, but he held me tighter. "You have to say you did it," he said. "Say you were practicing your penmanship. Say you didn't know it was stealing. You wrote the checks. Tell them you wrote the checks." "No," I whispered. Tears were hot on my face. "I didn't do it. That's a crime. I want to go to college, too." "You will?" he insisted. "We'll take care of you. We just need to save the family name. Do this for us, Natalia. Do this for your brother." I looked past him. I looked at my mother. She was standing by the fireplace. She was wearing her blue robe. She knew I didn't do it. She knew Caleb was the thief. I looked her right in the eyes, begging her to step in, begging her to be my mother. She looked at me for 1 second. Then she turned her head and looked at the wall. That was the moment I died. The handcuffs didn't kill me. The juvenile detention center didn't kill me. The shame didn't kill me. It was that silence. My mother traded my future to save her son's reputation. They sacrificed me. If you believe no child should ever be forced to pay for a parent's favoritism, please hit the like button to show your support. Snap. I blink, and I am back in the hotel room. I turn off the iron. My hand is shaking just a little. I make a fist squeezing it until the shaking stops. I walk over to the desk. There is a file sitting there. A court summons. I pick it up. The irony is so thick I can taste it. It tastes like copper. The case is Benson versus Meridian Life Insurance. My father passed away 6 months ago. I didn't go to the funeral. I wasn't invited. But even in death, he is causing trouble. There is a dispute over his life insurance policy, $850,000. The insurance company claims the signature on the renewal form is a forgery. They are refusing to pay. My family, my mother, and Caleb are suing to get the money. They say the signature is real. The court needed an independent, neutral expert to verify the handwriting. They called my agency. They hired the best in the state. They hired me. They don't know who I am. I changed my last name professionally. To them, I am just Ms. N.R. Thorne, the expert witness. They don't know that the judge and the jury are going to listen to me decide their fate. I pick up my briefcase. It is heavy, filled with high-resolution scanners and magnification tools. My father exiled me for a forgery I didn't commit. He sent me away to save his son. And now, 13 years later, the fate of his fortune rests on my ability to spot a lie. They told me to lie about my handwriting once to save them. Today, I am going to tell the truth about theirs. I open the hotel door and step out into the hall. It's time to go to court. The county courthouse is a machine designed to intimidate. It smells of floor wax and old paper, but mostly it sounds like secrets. Click, clack, click, clack. My heels struck the marble floor. The rhythm was steady. I walked through the security checkpoint and into the main rotunda. The ceiling was high, a great dome of glass and stone that swallowed sound and spit it back out as a low, indistinct hum. I checked the monitor on the wall. Courtroom 4B. Benson versus Meridian Life Insurance. 10:00 a.m. I was early. I am always early. I walked toward the corridor leading to 4B. There were benches lining the walls occupied by nervous people in their Sunday best. Lawyers huddled in tight circles checking their watches. Then I saw them. They were standing near a large stone pillar slightly away from the main flow of traffic. I stopped. I stepped back into the shadow of a vending machine alcove. I was less than 20 feet away, but they didn't see me. They weren't looking for me. They were looking at a piece of paper in their lawyer's hand. My mother, Ellen Benson. She looked smaller than I remembered. 13 years takes a toll, I suppose, but it wasn't just age. She looked brittle. She was wearing a gray wool coat that was high quality but visibly old, maybe 10 years out of fashion. She was clutching a rosary in her left hand. her thumb moving over the beads in a frantic, jerky rhythm. And there was Caleb, my brother, the heir. He was 32 now. He had been lean and handsome at 19, the kind of boy who charmed teachers and neighbors effortlessly. Now he looked like a balloon that had been overinflated. His face was puffy and flushed red. His suit was expensive, a dark charcoal pinstripe, but it was too tight across the shoulders. The top button of his shirt was straining against his neck. He was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead even from here. He was arguing with their lawyer, a man with slicked-back hair and a weary expression. "It has to be today, Marcus," Caleb said. His voice was a harsh whisper, but it carried in the echoing hall. "The bank called again this morning. They aren't waiting past Friday." The lawyer Marcus shook his head. "Caleb, keep your voice down. We are at the mercy of the court schedule and the expert witness." "Expert witness?" Caleb scoffed. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "It's a signature, for God's sake. Dad signed it. I watched him sign it. Why do we need some graphology nut to tell us that? Because Meridian Life is claiming fraud," Marcus said patiently, "and because you are carrying 3 mortgages on the estate. If we lose this, Caleb, the foreclosure process starts immediately. You know that. Your mother knows that." I watched my mother flinch. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes wide and watery. "The club membership is already suspended," she said softly. Her voice was thin, like dry leaves. "I couldn't go to bridge on Tuesday. They wouldn't let me in the dining room, Caleb. The shame of it." I felt a cold tightness in my chest. The shame of it. That was her concern. Not the lie, not the debt, not the daughter she abandoned. She was worried about being embarrassed at the country club. "Stop it, Mom," Caleb snapped. "We get the $850,000, we pay the arrears, we clear the equity line. We're back on top. Nobody has to know." "It's not just the house," the lawyer said, closing his folder. "The IRS liens are significant. If this policy doesn't pay out, Mr. Benson's estate is insolvent. You will walk away with nothing, actually less than nothing." Caleb grabbed the lawyer's arm. It was an aggressive move. "Just get the money, Marcus. I don't care what you have to do. Dad wanted us to have this. It's mine. It's mine. Not, it's ours." I watched him. I studied him like I study a forged check. The pressure points were all wrong. He was angry, yes, but underneath the anger there was terror. He was a man standing on a trapdoor waiting for the lever to be pulled. For a split second I felt something soft rise up in my throat. Pity. It is a terrible thing to watch your family crumble. It is a terrible thing to see your big brother, who used to teach you how to ride a bike, shaking with fear over money. Then I heard the sound of a heavy metal door slamming in my memory. Clang. I remembered the cold cell. I remembered the scratchy wool blanket of the detention center. I remembered waiting for a letter that never came. The pity evaporated. It was replaced by something colder. Something useful. I checked my watch. 9:45 a.m. It was time to introduce myself. I bypassed the main courtroom doors and went to the witness waiting area. It was a small antechamber, a sterile room with a long mahogany table, a pitcher of ice water, and a stack of styrofoam cups. It was quiet here. The air was still. I placed my briefcase on the table. I didn't open it. I just stood there, smoothing the front of my blazer, waiting. The door handle turned. Caleb walked in. He didn't look up at first. He went straight for the water pitcher. He was muttering to himself a stream of curses under his breath. He grabbed a cup and poured splashing water onto the polished wood. He drank it in one gulp, crushed the cup, and threw it into the trash. Then he turned around. He saw me. He froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He blinked once, twice. It was as if his brain couldn't process the data. He was seeing a ghost. "Excuse me," he said automatically. He started to turn away, assuming I was a stranger. Then he stopped. He looked back. He squinted. "Nat," he whispered. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I stood with my hands clasped in front of me, perfectly balanced. "Hello, Caleb." The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly paste-like gray. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if he expected me to bite him. "Natalia," his voice cracked. What are you doing here? Did Mom call you?" "How did you know I'm working?" I said. My voice was even. No vibration. No emotion. "Working." He looked at my suit. He looked at the expensive briefcase. He let out a short, nervous laugh. "You're a lawyer now, is that it? Look at you. You look expensive." He took another step closer. He was trying to find the old rhythm. The rhythm where he was the big brother and I was the little sister who followed him around. "God, it's been forever," he said, putting on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We missed you, Nat. Mom talks about you all the time. We were just... Things got complicated, you know. With the business, with Dad." "I heard he died," I said. Yeah, he did." Caleb wiped his forehead again. "Heart attack. Stress mostly. He worked himself to death for us." He paused, waiting for me to comfort him. I said nothing. The silence stretched out between us, tight as a piano wire. Caleb's smile faltered. The charm wasn't working. So he switched tactics. He switched to the only other thing he knew: entitlement. "So why are you really here?" he asked, his voice hardening. "You here to gloat? You heard we were having some cash flow problems and you came to watch. I am the court-appointed forensic document examiner," I said. "I am here to authenticate the signature on the insurance policy." Caleb stared at me. His eyes bulged. "You," he choked out. "You're the expert. That's a joke." "It is not a joke, Caleb. It is a profession." He laughed again, but this time it was mean. It was the laugh he used to use when he pinned me down and tickled me until I couldn't breathe. "That's rich," he sneered. "The girl who got sent away for forging checks is now the expert on handwriting. Does the court know about your record, Nat? Does the judge know you're a criminal?" "My record was sealed," I said calmly, "just as Father promised. Remember?" He stepped into my personal space. He was close enough that I could smell the stale alcohol coming off his skin. He was trying to intimidate me. He was trying to make me feel small again. "Listen to me," he hissed, leaning down. "You owe us. Dad kept you out of real prison. He paid for that lawyer. You owe this family." He poked a finger toward my chest. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked at his finger, then up at his eyes. "You are going to go in there," he said, "and you are going to tell them that signature is real. You hear me? You are going to fix this. Because if we lose this money, it's on you. Again." He was rewriting history in real time. In his mind, I was the problem. I was the reason they were struggling. I walked past him to the table. Clink. I picked up the heavy glass pitcher. Glug, glug, glug. I poured a glass of water for myself. The sound was crisp and clear in the small room. I took a slow sip. "Caleb," I said. I didn't shout. I lowered my voice, forcing him to lean in to hear me. "I am going to go into that courtroom. I am going to place the documents under a microscope, and I am going to tell the court exactly what the ink says." "It says it's Dad's signature," he shouted. "If it is," I said, setting the glass down, "then you have nothing to worry about. Do you—" He stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He wanted to hit me. I could see the impulse twitching in his right hand, but he couldn't. Not here, not now. "You better do the right thing, Natalia," he growled. "Family comes first." "Yes," I said. "I remember you teaching me that lesson vividly." I checked my watch again. "You should go, Caleb. The bailiff is about to open the doors." You don't want to look flushed when the judge enters. It suggests guilt. He glared at me with pure hatred. Then he spun around and stormed out of the room, slam. The door shook in its frame. I stood alone in the silence. My hand was still resting on the cool glass of water. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt a strange, icy clarity. He was afraid. He knew what he had done, and he was right to be afraid. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding the pen. I was the one holding the magnifying glass. Have you ever dealt with relatives who only care about money even when family is suffering? Don't be shy to share your story in the comments. All rise. The bailiff's voice was a bark. It cut through the murmuring in the room like a knife. Shuffle, creak, thud. The sound of 60 people standing up at once. The heavy wooden benches groaned under the weight. I stood up. My hands were steady. I smoothed the front of my blazer. Judge Harlan entered. He was an older man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen too many lies. He sat down. The robes settled around him. "Be seated," he grumbled. The courtroom exhaled. We sat. The air in the room was heavy. It tasted of dust and anxiety. To my left at the plaintiff's table sat my family. My mother Ellen was staring at her hands. She was twisting her wedding ring, round and round. It was a nervous tic I remembered from my childhood. Caleb was leaning back in his chair. He looked confident now. He had bullied me in the waiting room. He thought he had won. He thought I was still his little sister, the one who would take the fall. He caught my eye and gave me a tight warning nod. "Remember your place," the nod said. I looked away. I looked at the witness stand. It was a lonely wooden chair raised above the rest of the room. It was a place of judgment. "The court calls the independent expert witness," the clerk announced. "Ms. N.R. Thorne." I stood up. I walked down the center aisle. The marble floor was hard beneath my heels. Click, click, click. I felt their eyes on me. I heard the sharp intake of breath from the plaintiff's table. My mother's head snapped up. She squinted. She didn't recognize the name, Thorne, but she recognized the walk. I passed the railing. I saw my mother clutch Caleb's arm. I saw her mouth form the word, "Natalia." Caleb went rigid. He stared at me, his face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. I stepped up to the stand. I turned and faced the room. "Raise your right hand," the clerk said. I raised it. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" I looked directly at Caleb. "I do." I sat down. The microphone hummed. The lawyer for the insurance company, Mr. Sterling, stood up. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, holding a laser pointer. He didn't want to pay this claim. He wanted to prove fraud. "Ms. Thorne." Sterling began walking toward me. "Please state your credentials for the court." "I am a certified forensic document examiner," I said. My voice was clear. It filled the room. "I trained with the Secret Service Questioned Documents Division. I am a member of the American Society of Questioned Document Examiners. I have authenticated over 4,000 disputed contracts, wills, and deeds." I saw my mother shrink in her seat. She looked terrified. She had no idea. They thought I was a criminal. They didn't know I had become the law. "Impressive," Sterling said. He didn't care about me. He cared about the result. "Now let's look at Exhibit A, the life insurance renewal form." The lights in the courtroom dimmed. A projector whirred to life. On the large screen, a signature appeared. Giant. Black ink on white paper. It read, "Robert J. Benson." "The insurance company asserts," Sterling said, "that Robert Benson did not sign this. We believe his son, Caleb Benson, forged it to keep the policy active after the grace period expired. What is your conclusion?" The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the back wall. I looked at the screen. I looked at my father's name. I examined the exemplar signatures provided by the bank, I said, and I compared them to the questioned document. I pointed to the screen. Look at the capital R, I said. Notice the initial attack stroke. It is sharp, fast. It flies onto the page. That indicates a writer who is decisive, a writer who does not hesitate. I moved my hand to the end of the name. Now look at the N at the end of Benson. See how the ink tapers off? We call that a flying finish. The pen leaves the paper while still in motion. I paused. I looked at Caleb. He was holding his breath. A forger. I said, needs to look at where they are going. They hesitate. They draw the letters instead of writing them. Their ink pools at the end of the line because they stop the pen to check their work. And here, Sterling asked, there is no pooling, I said. There is no hesitation. The speed is natural. The pressure pattern is consistent with Robert Benson's known writing. I leaned into the microphone. It is my professional opinion that the signature on the renewal form is genuine. Robert Benson signed this document. The policy is valid. Exhale. The sound came from the plaintiff's table. Caleb slumped back in his chair. A massive grin broke across his face. He looked at his lawyer and winked. He looked at me, his eyes shining with triumph. Good girl, his eyes said. You did as you were told. My mother started to cry. Soft, relieved sobs. They had won. They were going to get the $850,000. Mr. Sterling looked defeated. He capped his pen. I see. Thank you, Ms. Thorne. No further questions? He started to walk away. Wait, I said. The word hung in the air. Sterling stopped. He turned around. Excuse me. I am not finished, I said. Judge Harlan looked over his glasses. Ms. Thorne, you answered the question. I was asked to authenticate the policy documents, I said. That includes the attachments, specifically Exhibit B. Caleb's smile vanished. He sat up straight. Exhibit B, Sterling asked. You mean the change of beneficiary form? Yes, I said. The form dated 2 days before Robert Benson died. Objection. Caleb's lawyer jumped up. That document is not in dispute. It is part of the policy file, Judge Harlan ruled. Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Thorne. I clicked the remote in my hand. The image on the screen changed. A new document appeared. It was a standard form. Primary beneficiary Caleb Robert Benson. At the bottom there was a signature Robert J. Benson. This document, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, removes Ellen Benson as the sole beneficiary and assigns 100% of the payout to Caleb Benson. I heard a gasp. It came from my mother. She turned to look at Caleb. He wouldn't look at her. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with panic. He was shaking his head slightly. Don't, he mouthed. Don't do it. I looked at the screen. When I analyzed this signature, I said, I found something very different. Look at the B in Benson, I instructed. Do you see the microscopic jagged edges in the curve? That is not natural penmanship. That is a tremor of deceit. A what? The judge asked. A tremor of deceit, Your Honor. It happens when the hand is fighting the brain. The writer is trying to copy a shape, but their adrenaline is spiking. Their muscles are tense. The hand shakes. I stood up and walked to the screen. I traced the line with my finger. And here, I pointed to the O. See the heavy dot of ink that is a pen lift. The forger stopped. He lifted the pen to see if it looked like the original. Then he put it back down to finish the letter. Robert Benson never lifted his pen in the middle of his name. Never. So, Sterling said, his voice rising with excitement. You are saying this is a forgery. It is a crude simulation, I said. A clumsy attempt to copy a dying man's hand. And do you know who wrote it? Sterling asked. I do. Objection! Caleb screamed. He stood up, knocking his chair over. She's lying. She's got a vendetta. She's crazy. Sit down, Mr. Benson, the bailiff barked, stepping forward. I compared the handwriting on the forgery. I continued speaking louder over the commotion to the handwriting on the plaintiff's affidavit signed by Caleb Benson. I clicked the remote again. Side by side, the forgery and Caleb's signature. Look at the letter E, I said. It has a specific unique loop. It is identical in both documents. The writer of the forgery has the same muscle memory as the writer of the affidavit. That's a lie, Caleb shouted. He was red-faced spit flying from his mouth. You ungrateful little witch, after everything we did for you. The courtroom erupted. People were whispering, pointing. The judge was banging his gavel. Bang, 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 order. Judge Harlan shouted, Order in this court. I didn't look at the judge. I looked at my mother. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Caleb. Her face was pale, drained of all blood. She looked like she had been shot. Caleb, she whispered. Her voice was small, but in the sudden silence following the gavel, it was deafening. You took it. You took it from me. Mom, no. Caleb stammered, turning to her. I was going to manage it for us. You know you're not good with money. I was protecting you. You forged your father's name, I said into the microphone. You waited until he was on his deathbed and you stole his legacy. You tried to leave your mother with nothing. Ms. Thorne, the judge said, his voice sharp. Is it your professional conclusion that Caleb Benson forged the change of beneficiary form? I looked at my brother, the boy who let me go to jail for him, the man who tried to bully me in the hallway. Yes, Your Honor, I said. Robert Benson signed the renewal. He wanted his wife to be safe. But Caleb Benson signed the beneficiary form. He wanted the money for himself. The judge looked at Caleb. The disgust on his face was plain. Let the record show, the judge said, that the witness has identified the plaintiff, Caleb Benson, as the author of the fraudulent document. Caleb sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. My mother sat frozen. She looked across the aisle at me. For the first time in 13 years, she really saw me. She saw the daughter she had thrown away to save the son who had just betrayed her. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. There was no joy in this. There was only the sharp black ink of the truth. Bang, bang. The gavel hit the wood. It was a final hollow sound. Judgment for the defendant, Meridian Life Insurance, regarding the beneficiary change, Judge Harlan announced. His voice was tired. He looked at Caleb with a mixture of pity and disdain. The change of beneficiary form is hereby declared void due to fraud. The policy proceeds shall revert to the original beneficiary, Mrs. Ellen Benson. The courtroom let out a collective breath. It was over. But then the noise started. No. It wasn't a word. It was a noise. A raw animal noise. Caleb stood up, knocking his heavy oak chair backward. It clattered against the railing. You can't do this, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the judge, then at me. That money is mine. I earned it. I carried this family. He looked wild. The expensive suit didn't make him look powerful anymore. It made him look like a child playing dress-up. Mr. Benson, the bailiff warned, stepping forward. His hand rested on his belt. She's lying, Caleb shouted, lunging toward the aisle. She's a convict. She's a forger. You're listening to a criminal. The bailiff didn't wait. He moved fast. He grabbed Caleb by the arm, twisting it behind his back. Grunt. Scuffle. Let me go, Caleb thrashed. I watched from the witness stand. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play from a balcony seat. This was the brother who had let me rot in a cell. This was the heir. And now he was being dragged out of the courtroom like a common drunk. Mom, he yelled, as they pushed him through the double doors. "Mom, tell them, tell them." The doors swung shut. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at the plaintiff's table. My mother was still sitting there. She hadn't moved. She hadn't looked at Caleb as he was dragged away. She was staring at the empty space where he had been standing. Her hands were shaking. She dropped her rosary. Click. The beads hit the floor. She didn't pick them up. She just stared. She wasn't crying about the money. I could see it in her face, the slack jaw, the wide empty eyes. She was crying because her world had just shattered. She had sacrificed her daughter to save her son, believing he was the good one, the worthy one. And now she knew. He was a thief. And he had stolen from the only person she had left her husband. "Court is adjourned," the judge said softly. I stepped down from the stand. I gathered my files. I clicked my laser pointer off. I placed it in my briefcase. I walked up the aisle. I had to pass her. I had to pass the table where she sat. I slowed down. Just for a second. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. They were red-rimmed and full of fear. She looked like she wanted to say something. Her lips parted. "Natalia," she whispered. It was a ghost of a sound. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, I might scream. So I kept walking. Click, click, click. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air out here was cooler. The marble floor seemed to stretch on forever. I walked over to a bench and sat down. I put my briefcase on my knees. My hands were finally shaking. The adrenaline was leaving my body, leaving me cold. That was quite a performance. The voice was soft, warm. I looked up. Standing a few feet away was a woman. She was older now, her hair completely gray, cut short and practical. She wore a sensible beige raincoat and orthotic shoes. I knew that face. I knew the kindness in the lines around her eyes. "Mrs. Gable?" I asked. She smiled. It was a sad smile. "Hello, Natalia." She was my juvenile caseworker. 13 years ago, she was the only one who had visited me in detention. She was the one who brought me books. She was the one who told me that my life wasn't over just because my family said it was. "What are you doing here?" I asked, standing up. "I saw the docket," she said. "I saw Benson versus Meridian, and I saw the expert witness list, N.R. Thorne. I hoped it was you." "You knew." "I always knew," she said. She stepped closer. "I knew back then, Natalia. A 16-year-old girl with perfect grades doesn't suddenly start forging business checks for online gambling. It didn't fit the profile." "But I confessed," I said. "I signed the statement." "I know," she said. "I saw the pressure marks on that confession too. You pressed so hard the pen nearly tore the paper. You were terrified." She reached out and patted my arm. Her hand was warm. "I tried to tell the judge back then," she said quietly. "But your father, he was a persuasive man, and you were determined to protect them." I felt a lump form in my throat, a hard, painful knot. "I was stupid," I said. "No," she said firmly. "You were loyal. There is a difference. But loyalty to the wrong people is just self-destruction." She looked toward the courtroom doors. "I stayed today because I wanted to see it," she said. "I wanted to see you take your name back. You didn't just survive, Natalia. You prevailed." I bet they didn't see that coming. Let me know in the comments if you guess the surprise character was her old caseworker. "Thank you," I whispered. It was the first time I had felt seen in 13 years. The courtroom doors opened again. People started to file out. Lawyers, clerks, and then my mother. She was walking slowly, leaning heavily on the wall for support. She looked frail. She looked like a woman who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She saw us. She stopped. She looked at Mrs. Gable, then at me. She took a step toward us. Her hands were open palms up, a gesture of helplessness, a gesture of begging. "Natalia," she said again. Her voice was stronger this time, but it cracked. He lied to me. Caleb lied to me." I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "He did." "I didn't know," she pleaded. Tears were running down her cheeks, cutting through her powder. "You have to believe me. I thought he was taking care of the estate. I didn't know he tried to steal it." She took another step. She wanted me to hug her. She wanted me to tell her it was okay. She wanted me to be the daughter she remembered, the one who would fix everything. "I have no money, Natalia," she sobbed. "The lawyer says... He says if the policy pays out, the bank takes it all for the debts. I'll lose the house. I have nowhere to go." She was asking for help. She was asking for mercy. I looked at Mrs. Gable. She gave me a small nod. "It's your choice," the nod said. I looked back at my mother. I remembered the cold wind in the hallway. I remembered her turning her face to the wall while the police handcuffed me. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt tired. I lifted my briefcase. Snap. I closed the latches. The sound was sharp like a period at the end of a sentence. "The court ruled that the policy is valid, Ellen," I said. I didn't call her Mom. "The money will go to you. What happens after that? That is between you and the bank." "But," she stammered, "but I can't handle this alone. I don't know how to handle the lawyers. Natalia, please." "You have a son," I said. "He needs a lawyer right now more than you do." I turned to Mrs. Gable. "It was good to see you," I said. "And you, my dear," she said. I turned my back on my mother. I heard her gasp a sharp, wounded sound, but I didn't turn around. I started walking down the hallway toward the exit, toward the light of the afternoon sun. I had told the truth, and the truth had set me free. But it hadn't fixed the past. It just closed the book on it, or so I thought. Mizzy Thorne. It was Mr. Sterling, the insurance lawyer. He was running after me, waving a piece of paper. He looked annoyed. I stopped. I turned back. "There is a problem," he said, panting slightly. "A technicality." I looked at the paper. I looked at my mother, who was still standing by the wall, weeping into her hands, and I realized it wasn't over yet. There was one last thing to be written. "There is a problem," Mr. Sterling repeated. He was out of breath, his face flushed. He held a ledger in his hand, tapping it with his index finger. "A technicality." I stopped. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get to the exit, to leave this family and their wreckage behind. But I am a creature of details. I cannot leave a page unfinished. "What technicality?" I asked. My voice was calm, but my grip on my briefcase was tight. "The policy is valid," Sterling said, adjusting his glasses. "The court established that. But the premiums?" "During the 6 months of the dispute, while the accounts were frozen, no payments were made." He looked over my shoulder at my mother. She was still standing by the wall, weeping softly into a handkerchief. She looked like a ghost in a gray coat. "The policy is currently in arrears," Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a bureaucratic whisper. "Strictly speaking, it lapsed 30 days ago. The company could reinstate it given the circumstances. But without immediate payment of the back premiums, we have the right to hold the payout in probate for another year. Maybe 2. 2 years. I looked at my mother. She had no money. She had no husband. Her son was going to jail. If the insurance money was held up for 2 years, she would lose the house within the month. She would be on the street. "How much?" I asked. $4,200, Sterling said. It wasn't a fortune, But to a woman who had just lost everything, it might as well have been $1 million. Sterling shrugged. If she can write a check today, we can process the full payout by Friday. If not, he trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I looked at Ellen Benson. She had stopped crying. She was watching us. She didn't hear the numbers, but she saw the body language. She saw the lawyer shaking his head. She slumped against the marble wall, sliding down just an inch. It was the posture of total defeat. This was the moment the angry 16-year-old girl inside me had been waiting for. The girl who sat in a cell while her mother sat by a warm fireplace. The girl who was exiled. Justice had been served. Caleb was exposed. My name was cleared. I owed her nothing. I could walk out those doors, get in a taxi, and go back to my clean, orderly life. I could let the bureaucracy finish what my family had started. It would be fair. It would be poetic. Scritch, scratch. The sound echoed in my mind, the sound of a pen. I remembered what Mrs. Gable had said. Loyalty to the wrong people is self-destruction, but cruelty is a poison. If I walked away, now knowing I could have saved her with a stroke of a pen, I would carry that weight forever. I would be no better than them. They traded family for money. I would be trading mercy for spite. I didn't do it for her. I did it for me. I did it so that when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had more power than they ever did. "Hold this," I said to Sterling. I handed him my briefcase. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. It was leather-bound, soft, and cool to the touch. I pulled out my fountain pen, the Mont Blanc with the gold nib. I uncapped it. Click. I rested the checkbook on the wooden railing of the hallway. Scritch. Scratch. The sound was loud in the silence. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Meridian Life Insurance. I wrote the amount, $4,200 and Orlerert 100. My hand didn't shake. There was no tremor of deceit. There was no hesitation. The ink flowed smooth and black, soaking into the paper. I signed my name, not the name they gave me, the name I chose. N.R. Thorne. I tore the check from the book. The ripping sound was sharp, like a bandage being pulled off. "Here," I said, handing the check to Sterling. He looked at it. He looked at me surprised. "Ms. Thorne, you don't have to process the claim." I interrupted. "Reinstate the policy. Send the full payout of $850,000 to Mrs. Ellen Benson immediately." Yes, of course." Sterling pocketed the check. He looked at me with a new kind of respect. He nodded, then turned and walked back toward the courtroom offices. I stood there for a moment. My mother had seen the exchange. She pushed herself off the wall. She walked toward me, her steps unsteady. "Natalia," she whispered. Her eyes were wide, filled with confusion and a desperate, fragile hope. "What did you do?" "I paid the premiums," I said. "You will get the money on Friday. The house is safe." She brought her hands to her mouth. A sob escaped her, but this one was different. It was relief. "Oh, thank God," she cried. "Thank God. Natalia, I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. For everything. Can we go get coffee? Can we talk?" She reached out to touch my arm. I took a step back. I didn't do this to buy her love. I didn't do this to buy an apology. Those things were worthless to me now. "No, Ellen," I said gently. She froze. The use of her first name hit her like a slap. "You are safe now," I said. "You have your home. You have your money. You will be taken care of." "But you're my daughter," she pleaded. "I want to fix this." "You can't fix the past," I said. "You can only survive it." I looked at her one last time. I memorized the lines of her face, the color of her eyes. I was saying goodbye to the ghost that had haunted me for 13 years. "Goodbye," I said. I turned around. I walked toward the heavy glass doors at the end of the hall. "Natalia," she called out behind me. "Natalia, please!" I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I pushed the doors open and stepped out onto the street. The air was cold, but the sun was shining. The city noise washed over me, traffic sirens' voices. It was chaotic, and it was beautiful. I took a deep breath. My lungs filled with oxygen. For years, I thought revenge was the goal. I thought I wanted to see them burn. But revenge is just a fire that burns the house down. It leaves you standing in the ashes, covered in soot. Justice is different. Justice is fixing the lock. Justice is balancing the ledger. I exposed the lie. I protected the innocent even if she wasn't innocent towards me. I paid the debt. I am not the girl who forged checks anymore. I am not the girl who was abandoned. I am Natalia Benson. I am a master of the truth. And for the first time in my life, my signature is the only one that matters. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was walking forward. And that was enough. Click, click, click. My heels sounded on the pavement, fading into the rhythm of the city until there was nothing left but silence. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories like this. See you in the next video. Natalia proved that sometimes the sharpest weapon against betrayal is simply the truth. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your family and protecting your own dignity? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.